Greetings from Hyderabad. Today's event focuses on effective Sitecore governance, whether on-premises or in the cloud, presented by Kelly Rusk, Enterprise Architect and MVP, and hosted by Vishal and Yamin. Over to you, Kelly.
Thank you all so much, and good evening, everyone. I appreciate you taking time in your evening hour to meet with me. Today, we're really going to dive into a topic that many don't talk about enough. It crosses technology stacks, and especially within Sitecore, we're going to be very specific about Sitecore, but there are things in the overall ecosystem that affect Sitecore. So when we talk about governance, we're really going to talk about some primary things to really get you started in the right place. Kind of go do an overview of what governance is, what it isn't. Talk about a governance structure, documentation, and communication. Get into the infrastructure considerations. Start walking through every aspect for what kind of policies should you be considering for your environment. So when we talk about governance holistically, what we're really talking about are some key concepts, right? And those key concepts, really, when we think about a good definition of what governance is, we'll get into momentarily here, is it's something that nobody wants to do, but you have to do to be successful. So we're going to kind of walk through today about how to create a governance plan, including forming your own governance committee and communication. And we're going to use a governance plan template, which I'll provide after this call. So you get like a 30-page document where you can fill in the blank for a lot of governance policies. The goal that I want you to be able to do is create 10 policies and standards. And I know this isn't as fun as development per se or coding, but it's going to help you develop faster and have a better environment. You won't believe some of the gains you can have when you sit down and really talk about, well, what do we want to do? How do we do this? What does our DevOps look like, as an example? And then I want you to meet regularly and try to expand and improve upon your policies and standards. And then the goal here is not to be perfect. It's an iterative process, and you want to aim for a C+. So I want to pause there for a second. Have any of you ever developed governance or been a part of governance meetings or committees or talked through, hey, what do we do for our DevOps pipeline, or what do we do when we develop? Are there any coding standards we follow? So have you all ever been involved in those sort of discussions?
Mostly for production deployments, but not as such beforehand for these like DevOps and other things. Because
Sure.
it should exist ideally, but not following as a plan.
Awesome. So I'll tell you all that you're doing governance every minute of every day. You just don't know it. And the key that we're going to walk through is how to document it, how to effectively manage it. So every single day, whether you're communicating with your colleague about, hey, what design pattern do we use? Uh, how do we deploy to production? Are there any backups in case of an emergency? How do we evaluate this new version of Sitecore AI, really for us? Those are all governance discussions. So every day you're having governance occur. The question is, are you actively putting sort of your arms around it to establish how you're going to do these things consistently? So a lot of governance is really coming down to core principles of consistency, documentation, and communication. So when we talk about governance from a holistic example, we're really talking about this long definition, right? Establishment of policies, continuously monitoring, making sure the members of the governing body of an organization are engaged. How do we balance the powers of the members, making sure that everyone's accountable? That's a very heavy model, right? And I'm guessing we're here because we didn't want to be politicians, right? We love developing, we love creating solutions, we love seeing projects come to fruition. So I don't like this definition. Definition I like is very simple. DOC, document it, own it, communicate it. At the end of the day, if you do these basic things, three basic things, you're going to be in a much better place. So we're going to walk through, what that really means here, right? So when you document it, or just even write down a simple thing like, here's the 5 steps to go to production. And you have somebody who owns that, and this probably should be a group of people who own that, and you communicate that out to maybe a new teammate who joins, you've now been successful in governance. So we don't want to overcomplicate this. And this is what I see over the past 30 years. I see so many people overcomplicate everything. Generally, they don't have a good starting point. So we're gonna talk through kind of what does that starting point look like. So a starting point look like is very simple. We want to talk about really 2 core areas. Who's your governance committee, and how do you create policies and standards? And we'll talk about what's the difference between a policy and a standard. So a governance committee, really, you should have your executive sponsor, the person who maybe owns the Sitecore environment. Maybe your business owner, that might be the person who actually runs it day to day. It could be, generally, that's your project manager. And you want to involve some of your key players, acknowledging that your Sitecore administrator might also be your development lead, and that's okay. So these different roles that we have are just people you want to meet with once a quarter. So maybe every couple of months you meet and talk about, hey, here are the 10 things we do for our environment. And you know what? We just had a high severity issue. We've learned from that. We want to maybe document how to avoid issues in the future for that. And how you document that is really you set out your policies and your standards. So a policy is kind of what you should be doing, and a standard is how you do it. So if any of you have children, you're talking about their policy and standards every day. You tell them, hey, listen, you need to brush your teeth in order to keep your teeth clean. Every day we brush our teeth. That's your policy. Your standard is, well, you should do it for 2 minutes. Here, use this toothbrush over here and this toothpaste. So really, when we're talking about standards, you want to be thinking about it's like your run book of how things get executed. So a policy example could be content must go through an approval process before being published. But the standard is how we create and use the Sitecore workflows for publishing. And use maybe the workbox to view workflows or view items in the workflow status. CMS, you might say CMS content editors must reside in the Active Directory. And we want a secure connection. We don't want our content management server public. And that's what it means. Just as a side note, never expose your content management system. You're just asking for brute force attacks. And right there, that's a policy. We're saying, hey, we don't expose our CMS. Well, the standard for that will be all the networking rules and regulations around how we don't expose that. So I want to demystify this and make it easy for all of you, in that you want to grab just a handful of people who you work with regularly on the environment and list out very simply, and that's why I'll provide you a template. We can fill in the blanks, what you do to control the Sitecore environment. All right? And your documentation will look something like this when you're done. I'm kidding, team. It should not be complicated. It should never look like this. It does not need to be, a crazy equation, and it shouldn't make your mind spin. This should be very forthright. And what I want to imbue in you all today is that you're doing this already, but maybe you just need a little bit of structure to help you. So I want to pause there for a second and ask, are there any questions so far? And please raise your hands, ask questions as we go. Okay. Hearing no questions, we'll move forward, but please raise your hand, and there'll also be time allotted at the end for additional questions. So when we talk about governance documentation, we don't want to go create a massive, difficult equation where all day you're just managing governance documentation. We want to talk about some core precepts, and that is we're creating the USSR. That's the United Sitecore Server Republic. The Republic's not a democracy. You're here to represent the best. You're elected by all your colleagues and your users of the website. All your public users depend on you to have good governance to keep the website operational. You want to create a governance committee structure that elicits out the roles and responsibilities, how often you meet, and escalation procedures. So this is very, very actionable. Talk about your governance committee. It may be a good excuse to grab some lunch together as a team, but really it's there so that you connect, you talk about different themes in your areas that are concerning, and you discuss how to address them. It's the same way you meet every day in a scrum, except you formalize a time to be very specific and intentional about what you're doing with your Sitecore environment. And you're going to have your governance communication, because if you document something but never communicate it, no one's going to follow it. It's like if I have traffic rules, but I never put stop signs out, it will be a mess out there, right? We don't want to have people bumping into each other. So we want to make sure we communicate that and target the communication. And we're going to talk about what this looks like momentarily. And the bread and butter of this, the main thing you want to look at, or the key of this, is to have policies and standards. And policies to rule, you may not drive over 65 miles per hour. And the standard is what happens if you drive too fast and the police pull you over. So it really is these two aspects people get confused about. Maybe they'll have the policy, but they never write out their run book. And I'm guessing you all have dealt with run books for deployments, run books for your build pipelines, run books for what happens in a disaster. So that's all we're talking about here today. So when we talk about our actual governance communication, we're really getting into, all right, to who am I communicating with? What are you communicating? When are you communicating? The different angles communication means, and keeping it clear and to the point. Really, nobody's going to listen unless you have that strong what's in it for me. And be aware kind of the message for taking proper timing. And if you are a parent, you're doing this every hour, right? You're talking to your child. You tell them they got to get ready for school. You tell them that about 18 times because they're too busy in the morning, right? They struggle to listen, perhaps. You're trying different ways to tell them how to get ready for school, and tell them, listen, if you get to school, you go be with your friends. You have to go learn. You have to go be successful. Let's go do this. And at some point, if you talk to them too much about going to school, they're just going to stop listening to you. So from a communication standpoint, I'm not saying that we work with a bunch of children, but it's a good example that we all need to have proper motivation. So when you want to put your message out there to the right target at the right time, you want to really think about, what does a change mean and how will it improve things? So let's pretend that we all work together on a big cycle upgrade, and there's going to be new functionality and new rules around it. You might need to target your senior leadership and tell them, how does this change affect the organization? Well, it might have a new commerce capability that is going to have revenue impact. And you need a concise email of bullet points with executives know what's going on quickly. Your middle managers might need to reinforce this message to make sure that everyone complies with the new standards that are going on with the new platform. Maybe that's an email that happens 1 week apart. And the people who have their hands on the keyboards every day, they might need to know, what are the steps to implement this new commerce change? They might need a longer step with longer emails with the steps to implement. And that might be using Slack updates and 3 emails 1 week apart. So you can see there's a different consistency and a different messaging target depending on the level of the organization. So this is core to communication standards, right? And you think about this in your own personal lives. You will communicate differently to different people. You will talk to your children, your colleagues, your managers, and your executives in different ways. And that's okay, because we all have different responsibilities and different things that require different communication. So when we think about, what we're communicating, we're going to jump in here and we're going to talk about really the different areas of governance we want to be developing. So how is everyone doing so far? If I can keep 40% of everyone awake during the presentation of governance, I think we'll hit a good mark. So are there any questions so far? Has anyone built a communication plan or seen some of this in play before? Remember, you can jump in anytime with questions. We can also ask questions at the end of the presentation as you like. So let's jump in and talk about some of the policies you're going to be developing to be successful with governance. So from an infrastructure perspective, we're going to be talking about our network. So an example there for networking policies is saying that we have to maintain a firewall. And that firewall, the policy might say, we have a firewall to protect our website. And the standard is going to be all the rules for who you allow and don't allow. Maybe we're using Cloudflare and you want to prevent people from certain regions accessing your site. Or you want to make sure that you throttle and control the traffic. So you would actually list out what you're doing network-wise. You want to list out your servers and make sure you have those in place to explain your architecture. That actually can belong in governance because you want to say, we use a Sitecore SaaS environment. So we're using maybe Sitecore AI for our environment. And that includes these access endpoints. And here's a standard of who can access that. So we're always talking about action. You always want to be actionable with your standard. You want to talk about your Active Directory, perhaps. How do you scale? What's your storage look like? And a good storage policy is going to talk about not only where your storage is and the type of storage you use, but maybe your SQL maintenance plans. And what's the standard, what's your step-by-step? So the end of the day is to make it simple so that if any of you came off the street and it's your first day in the organization, you could clearly understand the rules around the environment. So your first day you come in and you see issues in the storage infrastructure. Maybe you have alerts going off because you have governance that allows alerts. You can go in there and pull the policy and say, we have a standard for our maintenance plan. Maybe the maintenance plan didn't run. Let's check that. And you also want to talk about your hybrid aspects. So maybe you have cloud services. Maybe you're on premises with a lot of your Sitecore, but you use Redis in Azure. So you want to walk through and say, okay, your policy would state we have a hybrid environment. And our standard would be, here are the different parts of that environment and how and who can access that. So you can see as you're going through this, and I will provide a document, we'll walk through it, is understanding all the pieces that make up your environment. It feels like a solution architecture, except it's not a single thing that you look at once. It's an ongoing reference so that you don't have to wake up in the middle of the night and try to figure out, well, what do we do? You can pull up the policy and deal with things such as, well, what's our WAF, our CDN and edge devices and bot blocking doing? What are our development environments and how do those work? What about QA and staging and production? Do we have a blue-green? And what's our policy for how to leverage blue-green? What's our standard for how we go through and maybe deploy code into it? Yamina mentioned earlier, they have some governance around going to production. Well, this is what you want to document. Document external integrations and APIs. If any of you have not used Swagger or a similar tool, it's great. If you can say, hey, we have a lot of external integrations. Here's the links to their Swagger, so you can see the schema and test the APIs. If you can centralize that information, you're going to save yourself so much time. And I know this stuff can seem pretty boring, but it's very, very powerful. And each of you, when we talk about governance documentation, we're talking about very, very small things you can fit into an email. If you feel like you're writing a book, you're going too far when it comes to your policies. And each of these sections here are really talking about the things you need to focus on and think about. Infrastructure as well. Have you talked about your app service and web apps? Have you gone to some of the aspects that really matter here? So again, think about your development environments. Think about these aspects as it relates to the cloud. So whether it's on premises or in the cloud, you can see a lot of similar policies. So if you're in the cloud, it will be a little different as far as your standard is concerned, but the same as on premises, you're going to have dev environments, QA environments, production environments. So think about this in two ways, right? You might have a hybrid environment. You might be on premises, you might be in the cloud. Your policies generally don't change. The standard or what you do in your environment might change. So on premises, I might have, oh, we have to be on the VPN and RDP into the virtual machine to adjust an IS setting. Well, in the cloud, you don't have that, but you have a policy that determines that you have a development environment in the cloud or on premises and how to access it. So just remember that your policies tend to apply whether on premises or in the cloud. You might have a combination of both. Where they differ are the standards, because the standard is your runbook. So infrastructure, again, this is something that your infrastructure team person should manage, and we can look at that. So we're going to shift gears here and talk about one of the more frustrating areas, DevOps, right? So this is our DevOps when things don't work, right? All of us have had those feelings. Maybe some of you have taken your keyboard to your computer. I don't recommend it. You're not actually damaging the computer. The computer is, of course, below. But from a DevOps perspective, we really want to talk about, okay, what kind of source control or branch management do we use? So from a branch management perspective, you can use a trunk-based deployment. You can be more iterative. There's a lot of different options, right? And I'm sure all of us have had those arguments back and forth about, well, what do we do in source control? How do we manage our branches? How do we merge things together? How do we rebase? So what I'm begging you to do is, instead of just trying to remember it or have something called tacit knowledge where it's trapped in our minds, just write down how to access source control and what you do about your branches. You will save yourself so much time and pain if you consider that. So then your DevOps and development considerations, part of your governance policies, you want to be talking about source control, development tools, team communication. How do you communicate on development projects? And your release management, right? Are you using any kind of continuous integration or continuous delivery, or blue green? What's your monitoring look like? What's your rollback look like? So these are all critical things you need to be thinking about. And again, you're doing this already. So we just need to shift and talk about, well, if I'm doing it already, let's document that. Let's talk about that more often in a structured manner. So this is the big shift for organizations. When you go from non-structured communications about your governance to structured communication about things like your deployment targets, your testing methods, escalation points, you save yourself so much time and pain. And how many times have you ever been in a high severity call where you're relying on that one person to show up because they know everything about the network? You want to avoid that. You want to get to a position where you have organization knowledge captured for the whole organization to use. And DevOps is one of those areas where you can get a lot of quick wins by just writing down and maybe doing a few diagrams about how you have your source control, how you have your deployment set up. It'll be nothing more than that. Remember, our goal here, I'm showing you policy areas, a lot of policy areas today, right? But I just want you to pick 10 that are impactful, 10 that you deal with every day, and those 10 are those that you talk about with your colleagues regularly. And they're probably in the DevOps area because that's where you cross over the most. Any questions so far before we continue about other policies and standards to consider? All right. Not to give you all nightmares, but we're going to talk about monitoring and security considerations, the scary part, right? So from a monitoring security standpoint, we want to be talking about, good policy that I love. No content management access externally. That's the policy. The standard says how you do that. We want to talk about who's got the authority to add people to the Sitecore environment. From a networking perspective, who can access the network? Who can be on the network? Do you use VPNs? If not, why not? How do you protect these aspects? Who can actually access your server and your virtual machines? These are really critical aspects for keeping your environment safe. And these are very basic things. So if we're using Sitecore AI or previously Sitecore XM, who's got access to the cloud portal? And where is the access defined? What are the links to your organization identity, right? So you want to be thinking about these aspects from a security standpoint and have somebody own this. So when you come to the table, and generally this can work really well in like a wiki. So if you use Confluence, the organization I work with, we have a big Confluence area. It has all of our standards. And we have every day people go there and say, oh, that's our standard for this. Or, you know what, I wonder what we do about this. Let's talk about this and document it. So we talk about it every day. And as a result, all our developers understand our design patterns. They know who to go to and escalate to on security issues, whether those are, even who can develop and deploy, right? Maybe your developers can't deploy, and that's a good standard. Making sure that from a policy perspective, you might have a standard, you might have a policy that states that only the Sitecore administrator can press the deploy button, and the standard is how to press the deploy button and the security aspects. You might have talks about what do we do if there's a security breach? How do we manage that? What about contractors who come into our organizations? Maybe I'm a contractor. What are the rules I follow? And and it's day one, is there a standard that talks about contractor access? So you want to just document these things. And again, these are things that happen every day. All these things are very, very, very common. You might want to have a whole policy about password management or physical security. So maybe physical security is that you have to make sure your laptops are secure so that no one can walk away from them, right? How do you prevent social engineering? So you can get into quite complex aspects here. But the core point when we talk about governance in a security setting is understanding who can access what when. And you want to go no further than that. And if you start with nothing more than a sentence per policy, you're already much further along than you are. And I'll tell you right now, most of the time organizations fail because they try to do too much when it comes to governance and they never start. What we're asking for here is that you just grab a couple of people, say, we're going to meet every 3 months. We're going to talk about the few things we collaborate on and make sure we have those documented in a very lightweight manner, that somebody writes it down on a piece of paper. And that's the biggest jump. That's the biggest part where people fail in governance. They never write it down. So I'm begging you to please write it down. You will thank yourself later. And we're going to write things down and we're going to talk again. An example of security, as we shift into analytics, you're going to have stuff like process policies. So you might have some security aspects on who can even access your analytic infrastructure, who can create different workflows. There's a lot here going on. So let's shift gears to talk about analytics. So when we talk about your personalization strategies, maybe using even Sitecore AI, you want to be talking about who am I targeting? These user profiles. Who do we care about from analytical perspective? What are you collecting, including your bounds for your agentic AI, right? So if you're using those aspects, especially with artificial intelligence, you need to start defining what are the boundaries of what it can collect. And you want to talk about, data versus information here. You might say, hey, I want to capture all the users who come to the website. That's great. Maybe you just want to have Google Analytics tell you how many users are here. But if you don't use that information, why are you collecting it? So you need to understand from a analytical perspective, personalization perspective, even an artificial intelligence driven aspect, is are there any rules and regulations such as GDPR I need to follow? What do I do with all this information I'm collecting? And at the core of analytics, personalization, and these aspects is the whole question of how do I get the data and what do I do with it? Do I use that data to tune the personalization experience? Do I maybe use that data to meet a particular outcome. We used to have Cortex here, which is now kind of, we think about, for those of you that are still using Cortex, never used it. I use it just as an example, or you're using Sitecore AI. This is not just for your public users. So when you think about Sitecore AI, it's really talking about who can create the rules that are going to be used. Who manages our AI infrastructure? What kind of reporting do we have? So there's a lot here when we talk about, personalization, setting, tracking goals. And this is separate of AI. AI can accelerate all these aspects very quickly, but you still have to have bounds, right? And you need to capture those bounds to be successful. And again, you want to talk about shifting the content away from analytics. You want to talk about who are the content creators? Who are my editors? You should document that. You should know who they are. Who are the content managers who be your chief approvers? What do we do for content training? What do we do about images and dynamic content? Do they need to be a particular size? So these are main things from a content perspective you need to be dialoguing about. And this is really critical for your livelihood as an organization. Other policies go into your workflows and approvals. How do you synchronize content? Are you using Sitecore Sidekick? It's a great tool. Are you using Unicorn? How are you synchronizing content? Are you using taxonomy and item buckets? What about versioning, right? Do you have any discussions around versioning and how you manage it? And, I pause here because if you don't set up rules for your content management, you'll fail. You'll just spend your whole time trying to rein in users, figure out what happened to a piece of content, and you will waste time and take energy away from where it needs to be dedicated to. So as you think about content as it relates to governance, you really need to have at least 3 of your 10 policies being content related. So that's really critical, right? So let's shift gears now. Let's talk about search and commerce, right? So when you think about search and commerce considerations, we're really getting into, have you defined your search providers? Solar versus solar cloud? Do you talk about your index management? Do you tune your indexes? Do you review your scalability and performance on a regular basis? Have you documented your update strategies? You switch on rebuild. You probably have documented this somewhere, or it's in a Sitecore document. And you could say as simple as this. You could say, we use switch on rebuild to manage our solar indexes. That's your policy. And then your standard could just be a link to the Sitecore documentation. Again, you want to do the least amount of documentation necessary to explain how you manage something. Do not document for the sake of documentation, but you want to think about these areas, including backing up and restoring your search indexes. These things all come into play, right? From a commerce perspective, what's your infrastructure pertaining to commerce? You might have custom commerce solutions. You might have a Shopify integration. Your DevOps is pertaining to commerce, right? There's a lot of aspects here, including how do we manage our payment gateways? If you don't have a policy about your payment gateways, you need to get one right now. Because that standard of who can access the money and how you collect the money is one of the most critical parts of going into commerce. And you want to think about also your users. How many times you see a data breach and you're apologizing to some company, a company's apologizing to you because they had a breach. You bought something off their website and they had a data breach. So you got to talk about your data security. Talk about maybe you got some custom commerce solar cores. If it's commerce related, write it down. And scalability. What happens if you run a Super Bowl ad or a big ad, for soccer or cricket, right? You got a big cricket tournament, you advertise and you get a lot of users coming to your website. You're unprepared because you didn't write down your scalability and how you'd approach it. So again, all these things that I'm preaching about today is to get you motivated to say, yes, I'm affected by this. This hits me every single day. I come across things where I deal with marketing campaigns. We have sales and promos codes that come up all the time on our website. So I know these things exist. I'm going to be affected by these. So how about we just take a few minutes and document and communicate what we do about these scenarios? And you don't need to get all these bullet points I'm talking about. You don't need to have a policy for every single one. Just get your top 10 most impactful ones. And this is not just about how you operate your Sitecore environment today. It's also about your upgrades, right? So this person's working out quite seriously here. They need some help. So we're going to help them with good governance, right? So you want to talk about, from a governance perspective, what features do I gain from upgrading? So your policy could be here, we do a feature analysis before upgrading. And your standard is maybe a checklist of everything that you evaluate feature-wise to decide if you should upgrade at a particular time. Mainline support of Sitecore. You need to stay on a version of Sitecore that's in support. So what do you do? What's your policy for doing that? It might be we upgrade every 6 months as a release comes out. Your policy might be that you need to stay behind a Sitecore release, let other people go through pain, so you don't have to. These are very clear definitions of what you want to look into. What's your upgrade process? If you document the upgrade process, you're going to thank yourself so much every time you have an upgrade. And I want to pause here for a second. I know all of us on this call have been affected by a Sitecore upgrade. If not, you will be at some point. Think about how much easier it is if you just have a simple run book that explains how to upgrade versus every single time having to hire somebody else out or go research again and again and again on how to upgrade your Sitecore. So this is the missing gap. This is the difference between being a fly-by-night operation and a professional organization. It's when you can document and execute on your documentation. And I will say this with gusto and passion. If you don't govern it, you don't own it. So we're talking about very basic aspects here when we talk about how we're going to manage things such as upgrades, inclusive of what do we do about development changes? Well, you might need to say, we don't code as much in C#. We're moving to JSS and a lot of JS. Maybe our front end is now going to be all React. That's a major change for your organization. So your policy might be your development standards and training and resources. You can put that into governance, both for your end users, for your own users. Write down how, your policies for training. And, this is a great opportunity for a fresh look at features, right? So as you go through, Sitecore upgrades, don't miss the opportunity to document things out. It's going to help you so much. And once you have this environment, you've got your infrastructure policies, you're following maybe your SQL maintenance plans, and you have a standard to review them. You understand your deployment pipelines. Something can always go wrong. And that's where we talk about two aspects, right? Digital asset management and disaster recovery. Your images and content can get quickly out of control, and disasters can and will happen. You need to define what a disaster is. And before we get into that, you need to talk about all your content. I can't tell you how many times a website goes slow because you've not taken a good look at digital asset management and how you manage your images. So if you don't have something like a content hub, consider it. Talk about this is very similar to content considerations. What are your brand standards that you follow? And what's the storage amount of infrastructure that you're using for this? Is your website crashing because of videos you've posted? So when we talk about these two aspects of digital asset management and security, and really disaster recovery, we really want to talk about, are you managing your assets appropriately, or is that going to lead into a disaster? When we talk about disasters, we'll get there momentarily. I've seen some pretty bad disasters that come down to very basic things that could have been prevented, right? So before we get to disasters, let's finish up just on digital asset management. You want to talk about the asset workflow. Who can access your content? Who can publish content? Does it play into your DevOps? What about stock photos and template libraries, right? Integrations. And what about marketing campaigns and timelines for images? So again, digital asset management, you can have a flood of images that can make your site very heavy. You need to have ownership around your brand and your images, and governance should totally be here to document. You can say, we maintain a stock library for new web pages that content authors can use. Here is how they access those images is your standard. And here's the restrictions, or maybe of how big of a size they can upload. I've seen websites crash overnight because a content author uploaded a massive video and it just tore up the web page and it crashed the site. So when you think about your digital access management, think also about your delivery of the assets, making sure you have a CDN, so you don't end up in scary situations where you're in a disaster. In a disaster, you can plan for a disaster. And every time you have a disaster, you can update your governance so a disaster doesn't happen again. And I don't know how many of you have been through, a post-mortem, something's gone wrong. But what we're talking about here is literally just maintaining, what do we consider a disaster? And this is really important because you can get calls in the middle of the night for very basic things where somebody says, oh no, the site is down. And you say, okay, which part of the website is down? And they say, well, I can't access it. Well, no, that does not mean the website is down. So we have to have escalation procedures and talk about what really is a disaster. A content author not being able to access the CMS because they forgot their password is not a middle of the night emergency. Unless you're really dependent on them getting that content out, it's mission critical. So from a disaster recovery aspect, when we talk about governance, you need to define your acceptable downtime, what a disaster is, return to service, so not just live, but user traffic, when you're back up and operational, your DR environment. So you would say, we maintain a disaster recovery environment. And your standard for that would be, where does that environment live? Who can access it? How do you have a failover to that environment? And also, what do we do when we have maintenance? Who do we contact when it's a disaster? I'm listening these things out so that in the middle of the night, you all don't spend 5 hours trying to find out where things are. If you simply write it down, you're going to be in a much better situation. I don't want you all going through the nightmares. And the core aspects here when you think about governance is, you already do this every day. You're affected by all these things. So what do you have to lose by taking these aspects and documenting a few of them, right? So that's what we're trying to do. We're literally saying, hey, listen, there are some basic things that we need to do to be successful. We're impacted by these every day. And if I don't write these things down, it's going to be very difficult for me. And that's where we want to really get in here and think about this as a team, right? We want to talk about how do we manage things such as redirects? What do we do about our releases? How do we manage these aspects, right? So that's all we're talking about in this situation. And this is where we want to be successful. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. So, but it can become easy if you follow some of these aspects. And I'm going to chat in. I've got a a blog post I'm just going to give to you right now. I'm going to share this in the chat. It walks through a lot of the stuff that we talked about today. I'm going to share also my screen. I'm going to switch screens here momentarily. I'm going to chat and also have a governance whole section of my website here, blog. And I want to show you what a governance plan looks like. All right. I'm going to switch over. We're going to look at a governance plan. And this template I'll provide for you all. So when we talk about a governance plan, you can use this template. And can everyone see my screen? So everything we just talked about is here in this template. So I want you to take this template. I want you to promise me that you'll develop at least one policy on your own, even for yourself. And it looks scary. Don't be intimidated by it. It's just a fill in the blank aspect. It tells you what your Sitecore Governance Committee could look like, including the role and responsibility. I've written this down so you don't have to. I'm making this as easy as possible as you can get into governance. It's addictive. I promise you it works out. It explains a Sitecore governance plan, including, maybe a communication campaign example. And it gets into policies and standards by area. So it talks through all these nice infrastructure aspects, right? So you have a place for the rule and what's the standard. And it goes through and has this placeholders for every single thing. Maybe you want to pick one on external APIs. Explain that we have external APIs that we use. And here's how we manage them. Remember, the policy is what it is. The standard is what you do with it. So all the way down, including the cloud, your DevOps, everything's here. You just want to list out. You don't have to be complete. You don't need to do all of this. I'm saying out of here, I'm sure you can find 10 of these that affect you. And start with just one sentence. Maybe it's going to be services in your cloud portal access. And your policy might be something like this. Let me just put it in here. It can be as simple as this. Let me come down to that one again.
Thank you, Kelly. I think that was
Yeah,
really, really great presentation because I think you covered most of the Sitecore areas where governance is needed, and also it's really useful template because it just matters of two lines. What is policy and what is the standard? Because if we
yep,
jot down those two things, effective for a particular role. If I'm a content editor, I would look at those things in the content editor, note down those, and also I would like to uh, rely on that this really matters because everybody
yes,
has a small role and everybody has to go to this governance daily. So I think jotting
yes,
down those two things is really useful thing. And thank you so much for sharing the template. So I will definitely use it from daily.
great. Yeah, and make it a Confluence document, right? And when I talk about a rule, here's one, right? It's the policies like this. We use Sitecore AI as our
Yeah. Yeah,
cloud,
who's
right?
and also when to communicate. Yeah. This is
Yep,
really
and then
useful because at the situations where we would like to communicate, we should be able
yep,
to know whom to communicate at what time to communicate as well. Because if
exactly,
something fails and we notify database people, they are not aware of it and it just keeps on pressure on everybody, like at high level to low level as well. So it's rightly
yeah, exactly
important
right.
whom to communicate and when also. So I think that's a really great presentation and a lot of insights to be taken away. So thank you so much, Kelly.
No worries. Anybody have any questions? Do we see how governance is everywhere and we just need to get our arms around it? And I
Yeah, you
hope
can
this has
ask
been
any
worth.
questions to Kelly.
Yes, please. Ask away. Ask about anything here, governance, or ask about any areas and policies I've developed. I'm happy to help you on that. And hopefully this is worth it for you, that it makes sense for you. And please don't be shy. Is this what you expected coming into today? That it would be a little dry. It's not as exciting as, well, here's how I do the Sitecore AI thing, but it's really important, right? Thank you so much.
Anybody, any questions? You can ping Kelly also. He's a very helpful person in terms of Sitecore and all. So if you have any other
Yes.
questions, please let us know as well.
And I just want to say thank
Thank
you. I
you.
know this topic is very dry, but I wanted to thank everyone for the evening time, and I hope this helps you. I hope it gets you thinking about what organizationally can be successful. So you all take care. I'll be thinking about you today. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys. We'll join in next session later. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you all. Take care.